Welcome. I was recently asked to offer some thoughts on the topic of karma. Karma is a fascinating subject. It's easy to look at this through a really simplistic lens, but it's actually quite complex. There's a lot of subtlety to it. But at the same time, when it feels really complex, it can sometimes be really pretty simple. I ran across this, I believe this is from Twitter. The man who pulled into a parking space I was waiting for and told me to go screw myself has arrived for his job interview with me. I think that's called instant karma. Maybe you've seen the instant karma videos on YouTube. It's like life is saying, let's see how you like it. Karma, again, is a fascinating topic, and I'd like to talk about a couple aspects of it. The first is the power of remembering. So much of this practice is based on what's called sati, which is for remembering. And one of the remembrances is impermanence. Very, very powerful. But another, maybe even more important quality of remembering is remembering karma, cause and effect. What you sow, you shall reap. I'd like to talk about how intention is related to karma. And then finally, to talk about what's called the Wheel of Samsara, the Wheel of Becoming, which speaks of karma, but it also speaks of what is it that's beyond karma, which is really juicy stuff. So this whole element of Buddhist philosophy, focuses on impermanence, on emptiness, but also on cause and effect. And so recently, the Dalai Lama was asked, what is more important, to understand the great philosophical Buddhist teachings about emptiness, or to understand karma, to understand cause and effect? The answer is that it is more important to understand karma, to understand cause and effect. The teaching is really much more essential. Without understanding karma, you will not understand where you have personal responsibility and how to take responsibility. So, a lot of juicy stuff there to unpack. Gil Fronsdal is one of my Dharma heroes. Talked about how when he was living in a monastery, it was very easy to kind of let things be. When he got married and had kids, it was a lot more difficult, he said. When the kids are fighting, when one of them is sick, you have to make choices and you have to act. Mindfulness is about resting and being present in the moment. But when we're living in the world, we have to make choices and we have to take action. And that's where kind of the karma piece comes in. So I once sat a month-long retreat, and at the end of the retreat, one of the teachers said, if there's one thing to remember impermanence. Remember that everything changes. You may be familiar with the 5 daily recollections. They're just little remembrances to reflect on every day. And the first 4 speak of impermanence. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot avoid aging. I am subject to illness and infirmity. I cannot avoid illness and infirmity. I am of the nature to die. I cannot avoid death. I will be parted from all that is dear and beloved to me. So this is the first part of the 5 daily recollections, the first 4. Remember that everything changes. Everything you love is going to evaporate. And while that's a pretty grim thing to think about every day, there's a very interesting paradoxical thing, is that when I think about death and sickness and illness and the fact that everything I love is going to disappear, I remember that I'm going to die, but I also remember that I'm not dead yet. And that can sometimes bring up a really deep sense of gratitude, appreciation, wholesome intention. So remembering this fundamental truth that life equals change. If you resist change, you're going to suffer. If you embrace change, then you're kind of in the flow of things. And remembering this is, oh my God, it's just so helpful. Ran across this phrase, which I've shared here in the past, but I found it really, really helpful. In particular, this really came to me really strong when I was, sitting with my mother at the end of her life, and it was not pretty. And the line is to practice wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality. What a shift that created for me. Instead of being fearful and anxious and pulling back, to actually lean in. Could I be wholehearted in this process of being with her in her dying? I've been teaching meditation for a long time. And it's interesting, over the years, lots of different populations, from junior high school kids to businesses to government folks to CEOs to judges. And the one thing they all have in common is all of their stress is in their relationship to change. All of it. Life is about stimulus and response. And most of the time, we're reacting to stimulus, where we're unaware of our conditioning, and we're just we're in a pinball machine. And this is where the miracle of this practice comes in, to recognize that you can slow things down. That rather than fighting with reality, you can cooperate with it. And it begins to open up new possibilities. As the saying goes, if you fight with reality, chances are you're going to lose. It's a lot easier to learn how to work with it. So this remembrance of impermanence is just critical. Everything is going to change. When things are feeling really, really hard, remembering it's going to change is helpful. And it's maybe even more important when things are going great to remember that this too may change. So this speaks to the first four of these recollections. And here's the fifth, which is really turning attention to karma or actions. And you can just reflect on these words. I am the owner of my actions and heir to my actions. Actions are the womb from which I have sprung. My actions are my relations. My actions are my protection. The fruit of my actions, both wholesome and unwholesome, skillful and unskillful, I will inherit. Now there's a lot there. That you are the creator of action, but you're also the heir to your former actions. That you are the result of former actions. Actions can be your relations, they can be your protectors. And whatever actions you take, whether they be skillful or not skillful, you will inherit the fruit of those actions. So I'm sure you get a sense of this, the nature of cause and effect. And this idea of karma is certainly not limited to Buddhism. The phrase, as you sow, so shall you reap. What goes around comes around. From Matthew 7:12, all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do even so to them, for this is the law. And also the golden rule of Confucianism has a kind of a similar statement. This is interesting. Is there one word which may serve as a rule for practice for all one's life? Confucius answered, is not reciprocity such a word? What you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. It's so simple. I remember clearly when I first heard the golden rule, of course stated in the positive, do unto others as they would have them do unto you. And it made total sense, such a deep resonance with it. I remember just thinking, if everyone did this, we'd be living on heaven and earth. And then I saw in my inspiration, even at that 7 or 8-year-old age, of how few people actually practice it. And of course, I ran across this line from Bill Cosby in one of his very first records I remember as a kid, where he said, what they did in his family was do unto others before they do unto you. But this law is so easy to forget. And when we forget that law or that rule, then we're generally narcissistic, self-focused, narrow-minded, and self-preservationist. But I've noticed as soon as I remember it, there's more space. So this law of karma is sometimes misunderstood as predeterminism. That what you're experiencing is a result of past actions and you're stuck with them. But maybe it's the opposite. You're the owner of your thoughts, your speech, your actions. And through your thoughts and speech and actions, you actually influence the future. Maybe. It's not as simple as cause and effect. And there are lots of different theories, lots of different philosophies on karma. And this ripple of cause and effect can be much more subtle and long and cumulative than we're aware of. We do have these moments of instant karma where you get kind of immediate feedback from an action. But the Buddha was kind of quick to point out that it's not so simple. That not every single thing in your life is a result of a former action, because it's a much broader sea of cause and effect, all kind of bouncing off each other. When you think of being born at this time on the planet with environmental degradation, with polarization, global warming, conflict over resources, are you responsible for that? Is that the direct result of your former actions? I think not, but it's part of the makeup of here and now. If you have a genetic issue with your health, is that genetic issue your personal responsibility? Again, who knows? But one could argue no, but these are the cards that you've been dealt with. From what I understand, the Buddha did not say that all illness was a result of karma. And in war, for example, if someone assaults you, it's not necessarily the result of your past karma. It might be just kind of bad luck, or just part of like a bigger matrix of cause and effect kind of bouncing off each other. And yet there's something here about this that Ajahn Sumedho, wonderful teacher, he once said, I never understood this. If you believe in karma, why would you hold on to revenge? The person perpetrating misdeeds is setting in motion their own misfortune. And it's interesting, when I reflect on that, it helped me to see that someone being unskillful was simply going to perpetuate their suffering. And I had a pretty profound experience of this many, many years ago. When I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, I took some time to kind of bum around Europe. I had $300 for the whole summer. And a friend lent me his tent, which was a really, really nice tent. It was nicer than what I needed. It was a $300 tent, and he just lent it to me. And when I kind of arrived in Marseille in the airport, my luggage was on another flight. I had to wait. So I had just a few things with me. Among them, my tent, my all my camping supplies, all that sort of stuff. And I got up and left to take a look at the time, and I came back and all my things were stolen, which put me into a panic because there I was. I didn't have enough for 2 hotel rooms. I just didn't have the money. So anger, resentment, powerlessness, helplessness. And because I was waiting for the next flight was a long time, I decided just to meditate. And then it occurred to me of how miserable the person's life must be who stole my stuff. And I actually felt a pang of sadness for them. To be living that life, what kind of misery was the person living in now? And what kind of misery were they perpetuating? It shifted the sense of resentment to more of just a sense of sadness. Understanding this has been really, really helpful. There's a story which I find kind of hard to believe, but nonetheless, it's pretty inspiring. It's the story of these Tibetan monks who are being severely tortured in prison. After a long time, they're eventually released, and they were asked why they just didn't give up and die. And they said collectively that they did not want their tormentors to take on the karma of killing them. That's pretty amazing. So the sense of cause and effect. What if it's true? And what it does, I think, is it helps us reflect on really 2 things. On our intentions, what we most want, and then the actions that support that intention. I was at a conference and there was a question asked to the panel. I was on the panel and they said, "Do you believe in reincarnation?" And I said, well, if this is the only life we have, then I think we want to make the most of it. And if this is just a string of lifetimes and our actions are interrelated, then we want to make the most of it. One way to reflect on karma is to look back at your memories. Our memories so often affect our actions. I have one memory, a painful memory I go back to for myself. I grew up on a farm, kind of a gentleman's farm, but we had about 40 sheep, and from about the age of 6, I was in charge of feeding the animals, and I had to carry buckets of water. I had to pump, we had a hand pump, then I had to carry them a pretty good ways, and then dump the buckets into to water the sheep. And at one point, I think I was just lazy or resentful, and I skipped bringing the water. And the next time I carried water, the sheep were just frantic to drink. And just seeing the effect of my laziness and the suffering that I created these animals, because they drank down that water, and then I brought more, and then they drank that down, and then finally they were kind of satiated. But seeing the impact of my laziness or whatever it was, it still sticks with me today. In that same way, when I remember good things that I've done, that kind of fills me with a really wonderful sense of well-being. It's a story of King Ashoka, who was kind of the first real political follower of the Buddha, who was very taken by this whole principle of dana, of generosity, and was really kind of responsible for kind of injecting the whole dana philosophy into the culture. The story goes that he had a scribe who would kind of notice the nice things he did for people. And at the end of his life, that list was read back to him. And I think it's easy to kind of underestimate the power of our memories. And to naturally, in meditation, your memories they'll find you. You know, everything undigested will eventually find its way to you. But I know for myself that really being in that memory of that kind of the suffering I created, those animals, revived a deep intention to want to ease suffering in animals. Part of intention that moves into action is creating habits. And this can be a very interesting reflection to look at your habits. I've kind of lived into this whole principle of constant and never-ending improvement in my life. I'm always looking for hacks on how to improve my productivity and all that kind of stuff. And what I've noticed is there's kind of an unhealthy edge to it, because when you're in a process of constant and never-ending improvement, it means it's never ever okay the way it is. And there's something very powerful around just opening into acceptance and being and all that good stuff. But it's also when you're kind of stuck in a good habit or primarily in a bad habit, it's kind of an interesting thing to investigate. So I'd like to share with you a little reflection. I have found this to be really, really helpful. And it's a reflection on karma and a habit that you feel is not helpful, and yet you're still kind of caught in it. And I'll just share very, very briefly. It's been, I think I stopped drinking all alcohol probably about 4 years ago, but I love beer. I've always loved beer, love the taste of beer. And I noticed that I never felt that great the day after. But I just like the ritual of it. and yet at the same time, I was really aware I felt dehydrated the next day, and wasn't that helpful. And so I just thought, well, what if I didn't change this habit? What if I just kept doing this and kind of draw that out over time? And I could just see that it was like a degrading my health. And then I thought, if I changed it, if I didn't, what would that feel like over a long period of time? And I could feel long term how much more healthy and alive I'd feel. That's kind of a subtle practice. But nonetheless, taking a look at the long-term consequences of not changing, I found to be very, very helpful for me to sort of change my habits. So I'd like to offer a little reflection, if you would. If you like, you can close your eyes if you're comfortable, and you might think about some habit or some activity that you're taking part in that isn't necessarily wholesome, or you're kind of questioning it. Just take a moment to kind of hone in on that. And you can ask yourself the following questions. If nothing changes in regard to this habit or action, and this goes on for a month or a year, what would the result be? And if nothing changes and this goes on for 10 years or 15 years, what would the result be? You might even just sort of maybe even exaggerate a little bit just to kind of get a sense of that. And now, if there was a way that you could change this habit, either to refrain from it or to replace it with something more life-affirming, if you were to make that change, and if you were to be consistent with that for a month or a year or What would that be like? What would that feel like? And if you could imagine extending that out over 10 years or 15 years, what would that be like? And if you like, you can deepen your breath. And if your eyes are closed, you feel free to open them, or you can remain with them closed. Sometimes I have found this reflection to be really, really helpful. To sense if this habit or action goes on as it is for the next 5, 10, 15 years, what is the end result? To really see that. It's like they say, if you're firing a rocket at the moon and you're off just 1%, over the course of between here and the moon, you're way, way off target. And in that same way, when you reflect on a positive habit or a positive action, and you sense what is the effect over 5, 10, 15 years, what might that result be? One way I've kind of played with this is I usually take on a little creative daily thing that I do. And 3 years ago, I thought, you know what, it'd be fun to kind of do a daily cartoon. Just this is part of my little creative process of making something out of nothing. It doesn't take long, 5 to 10 minutes. And I've done that every day. I actually haven't, if I miss a day, I make it up, but it's very rare when I do that. And it's been 3 years, I have over 1,000 of these things. I'm not saying they're any good, but just that little habit has kind of opened up a lot more of a creative muscle for myself, just that little bit every day. So one of the ways you can work with this law of action and reaction is to sharpen your intention. Because if your actions influence your future, then the quality of your actions now are going to have impact. Deepak Chopra once said, to see the impact of your past habits, look at your health right now. And to get a sense of your future health, look at your habits right now. Of course, genetics play a large part in health, and we can't do everything about that. But to some degree, lifestyle, actions, and habits have huge impact on your health and on your future. I've just noticed for myself to get an impact of karma is to look at my diet. Chances are, if there are any toxins, they may have a long-term effect. Smoking, for example, doesn't necessarily give you immediate karma, but you tend to set in motion something that will have long-term consequences. If you meditate every day, just sort of pause, and you do that over years, there's a certain reaction that can occur there as well. As I like to say, sometimes it's the benefit you get from meditation itself, and sometimes it's the benefit you get by the trouble you don't get into because you're meditating. So it's an interesting question to really evaluate, what are your habits now that are creating wholesome states or less than wholesome states? And if you were to bring intention into those actions, how might that affect your future? So again, it's easy to think of karma, that karma explains everything. And certain philosophies they say that karma does explain everything. If you have potholes in front of your house, you're not pure enough or something like that. But I think it's been pointed out that it's much more subtle to that. And it's something about this relationship between intention and then the actions that you take. And what I love about this inquiry is that no one can tell you what's ultimately best for you. You need to make the choices that you feel are going to have the most wholesome impact as possible for yourself. And here, the sense of karma has to do with choice. The intention can be seen as like planting seeds. When you form a habit, the habit becomes your character, and that becomes your destiny. So when we think about their short-term karma, like the immediate feedback you get from an action, and then the long-term karma, like the accumulated effect of actions. And what about like big picture, long-term karma? And this, to me, is quite interesting because it points to the possibility of not being caught in this cycle of action-reaction. The first time I went to one of those, conference holistic health things many years ago, the Hare Krishnas had a stand there, and they had this model that they use, and it shows this image of a baby crawling, and then there's the baby walking, and then there's the young man, and then there's the warrior full of life, and then there's the kind of the midlife man, and then there's the aging, sick, and dying man, and then there's the death, like there's the corpse. Then there's primal ooze. And then a baby is formed, and then the cycle begins again and again and again. And it's a beautiful kind of illustration of what's kind of called the Wheel of Samsara, or the Wheel of Becoming. That when we are caught in this world of desire, this world of aversion, the world of confusion, that what drives us forward is this never-ending desire. You really want something, you fantasize, you obsess, you get it, and then the lure fades, and then you want the next thing. I meet people there, what they most want is relationship, to be in an intimate relationship. Then what they want more than anything is to be married. And then what they most want is kids. Maybe the kids will make us happy. And then it's like, well, if you just get the kids out of the house, then we'll be happy. And then if I could just be single again, then I'd be happy. This self-improvement cycle. We're chasing happiness, and we're running from unpleasantness. And this cycle, it really is it's like a little wheel that we're running on, running after desire, and in that desire becoming over and over and over again. And mindfulness is about becoming aware of the wheel, noticing the coming and going of greed and of hatred and delusion. It's noticing what's happening as it's happening, but more than that, it's noticing how you're relating to it. And this is where the understanding of karma is so important. When you feel anger, should you react, or should you investigate what's prompting that reactivity? It doesn't mean you don't act, but it might mean that you act more skillfully rather than unskillfully. Ultimately, it's possible for you to stop fighting the wheel of becoming. That phrase I love, of in the world but not of it. In the dream and out of the dream. And so when we would kind of reflect on intention and action and karma, I was once on a meditation retreat, and I was thinking about a certain political party, and I began to feel frustration, rage, anger, revenge, and I found myself fighting it. Not okay to feel this on retreat, but then I got curious, and I could feel this energy, this fire, this burning inside, and as I just made room for it, just noting it and letting it be, what was left was a sense of peace and a sense of compassion. There was a little bit of a sense of beginning to sense like the anger on the other side, feeling there's an unmet need there as well. And I realized that on that retreat, the karma I could have created by acting out of that rage. And at the same time, the possibility of responding to that force rather than a kind of a knee-jerk reaction. So this becomes a very practical way of practicing. More and more, and I take driving as a spiritual practice. When someone cuts me off on the highway, I just imagine what it's like for them. The world that they're creating for themselves through those actions. And when I can do that, I'm no longer participating into that whole cycle. So when you remember that you are the product of causes and conditions, you have certain tools. One tool is this faculty of wisdom. You can remember that everything changes. The positive experiences, the negative experiences, they're all changing. You can remember the fundamental emptiness of this life, that this wheel of samsara, the wheel of becoming, that when you remember that who you really are is beyond that conditioning, you can open up new possibilities. Compassion is a wonderful tool, remembering that everyone's doing the best they can. And remembering that your intention, remembering what's most important, can help you to move into an action which will feel more wholesome, that might not perpetuate the suffering, but open up some new possibilities. So the recognition of karma, of cause and effect, sometimes it can feel paralyzing, but it can also lead to skillful action. And the action is always informed by asking yourself, what is my deepest intention here? What do I really, really want? Someone said, how people treat you is their karma. How you react is yours. It's a wonderful little reading I love. It's entitled Peace by Dorothy Hunt. And she writes the following: do you think peace requires an end to war, or tigers eating only vegetables? Does peace require an absence from your boss, your spouse, yourself? Do you think peace will come from some other place than here? Some other time than now? In some other heart than yours? Peace at this moment without judgment. That is all. This moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Peace in this moment without thinking that it should be some other way, that you should feel some other thing, that your life should unfold according to your plans. Peace in this moment without judgment. This moment is the heart space where everything that is welcome. Let's just take a few moments, if you will, before we close to kind of reflect on this. If you like, you might close your eyes, and if you like, you might take 3 slow breaths, relaxing on the out breath. And you might let these words just resonate. Peace is this moment without judgment. Peace is this moment without thinking that it should be some other way, that you should feel some other thing, that your life should unfold according to your plans. If you'd like, you can deepen the breath. And if you'd like, you can open the eyes. There are times in my life when I like to just simply reflect on the cards that I've been dealt. I would love to have other faculties, other capabilities, other possibilities, but I realize this is what I'm working with. These are the cards I have in my hand. And I think when we do that, when we recognize this is what I have to work with in this life, and then we can move into an acceptance of that. We can then reflect on what we most want. Given the faculties I have, what do I want? What do I most want? And what actions are going to support that outcome? I think these are the foundational questions that can create a life that can feel in alignment. And having a life where heart and mind and spirit are aligned is one of the greatest joys there is. So knowing that all things change, knowing that everyone you love will vanish in no particular order, knowing that your life will evaporate, and knowing that you're not dead yet. How would you like to live your wild life? Thank you so much for your time and attention. Many, many blessings in your practice. Wonderful to be with you.